My name is Ernest Lamoth. I'm a reporter for the Southland Journal.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Buclet, and I'm a commissioner with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago.
Well, Commissioner, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you a little bit, how did you start with your passion for environmental justice?
Well, I am a native Chicagoan. I grew up on the far southeast side, like near 87th and Jeffrey, Stony Island. And the home I grew up in as a child flooded nearly every time it rained. And we'd have to put our appliances, our washer and dryer up on pallets and literally take shovels and shovel the sludge out of our basement and deal with the smell. And as a young child and young adult growing up, I didn't really know anything about why this was happening or what remedy we had for it, because we were poor, like Southside Black children and family. So that always was in the back of my mind. And then when I was in high school, I used to swim off of the point in Lake Michigan, which is at 55th Street in the lake. And it's funny because my classmates would say to me about Lake Michigan, oh, you're swimming in Lake Michigan, your skin is going to fall off. And I'm thinking at the time, now I know Lake Michigan is where we get our water from that we drink. So if we're drinking it, why is it bad for me to swim in it? Yeah. So then fast forward to when I became a state representative many years ago, and I became much more heavily involved in the policy behind water and climate change, environmental justice, because I oftentimes would caucus with the environmental caucus people on bills that were being presented before the General Assembly. And I became much more of a policy and expert on these issues, which really was the seed that planted for me to become an elected official addressing these issues. And then one last point, and that is when the former President Trump became elected in 2016, and I saw that he was systematically dismantling all the environmental protections that have been in place for years by both Republican and Democratic administrations. I just thought, like, what can I do to jump in here to help remedy this problem on the state, local, and county level? Because, what he was doing, I thought was a disaster for U.S. citizens and for the environment. And I know that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully you got something out of that.
No, I resonated very much with that story because I grew up on the South Side, 79th Street and South Shore Drive. So the same that you're talking about happened with us, and our basement used to get flooded all the time.
All the time. And we would just deal with it.
Yes. Can you talk to me a little bit, Commissioner, about why the general public should be just as passionate about these kind of issues as you?
Well, when it comes to issues about water, we should all be concerned about our environment and the water. What goes into the environment, what gets deposited into our fresh drinking water supply, which is Lake Michigan, affects all of us. And although the Water Reclamation District doesn't directly have anything to do with lead in pipes, that's still an issue. Lead in water main lines. That's still water issues, environmental issues are issues that we should all be concerned about. And what many people may not realize is that these issues oftentimes affect minority, Black and brown communities much more than they do majority communities. And so it's been kind of my mission in this position to try and deal with some of those issues directly.
It might be an obvious question, but I kind of want to hear from you. You said that it affects minority communities more often. Can you expound on why that happens?
Well, a little bit of history. Back in the early 1900s, banks routinely engaged in systematic lending practices known as redlining. And so it denied loans to people of color seeking to purchase homes outside areas that were deemed undesirable. And so they were built, and these undesirable areas were typically built in areas with higher flood risk. And so those were the neighborhoods and those were the homes that we often only had access to. The analysis of redline versus non-redline communities facing climate change shows that more than 58% of households in neighborhoods that were once designated undesirable for mortgage lending are non-white, and history has shown that when storms hit these communities, they often hit these communities of color much more, these redline communities.
And I know you previously had some experience working in the Chicago Park District. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I love the Chicago Park District. So after I left the General Assembly, I went to work for the Chicago Park District as their Legislative and Community Affairs Director. And in that position, what I did was work with elected officials throughout the city. I worked with elected officials in Springfield. I worked with stakeholders within the city community, community stakeholders, corporate stakeholders. And it was my job to bring the communities together under what's called Park Advisory Councils. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
Yes, I am.
So Park Advisory Councils, for those that don't know, they are community-based groups that represent different parks in their neighborhoods. So I would help organize and oversee all the Park Advisory Councils around the city so that these community members would have a voice in the types of programming and or activities that happen in the neighborhoods and in the parks. I worked with the aldermen to help with improvements on parks or even build new parks. We would go around looking for vacant lots in different neighborhoods and turn those vacant lots into green space. And as part of that job, to help with my education on environmental issues, I learned the importance of green space and how important green space is in terms of our health and our well-being, and the amount of green space kind of needed per person in order to have a well-balanced, happy environment.
And can you explain that aspect a little bit more on the reason why green space is important and how it benefits us as a society?
Well, as you know, it may be obvious, but trees provide oxygen, trees provide cover from the sun, green grass absorbs the heat from the sun. Another thing I did at the Park District was help many community members establish community gardens. Establishing community gardens is important with green space, especially in some of these Black and brown neighborhoods that have food deserts. So more green space, less concrete, less asphalt is good for everyone. And so it was our goal as the Chicago Park District and my goal as the community affairs person to find and build as many parks as possible and improve the existing parks that we have.
And if you continue with your term, can you talk about some of the initiatives that you would want in the future as part of your position as commissioner?
Oh boy. I want to continue working on environmental justice issues, of course. I think one of the biggest issues that we at MWRD face, besides what our charter is that most people have no idea what we do. So maybe I can just take a minute to talk about what we do.
Please do.
No one knows what the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District is, why we're established, and what our purpose is. And so in a nutshell, we are not the water department, so don't call me and ask me to fix your water bill. But what we do, if you think about a faucet in a sink, the faucet, there's a spout where the water comes out, the water that comes into your house that you might fill up your sink with to wash your dishes. And then when you let go of the spout, the water goes down the drain. So anything that goes down the drain, your dishwasher water, your washing machine water, when you wash your dishes, when you flush your toilet, anything that goes out of your house and into the sewer system, we actually take that wastewater and rainwater, we reclaim it, quote unquote, reclamation, and we clean it to make sure it does not make its way back into our fresh water supply, which happens to be Lake Michigan. And prior to the establishment of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, the Chicago River, which most of us are familiar with, used to flow directly into Lake Michigan. So as soon as residents would flush their toilet, the wastewater would go into the Chicago River, and the river would flow into Lake Michigan. And you can imagine the problems that would create when we're getting our fresh drinking water from Lake Michigan and there's sewer water going into it. So one of the things we did when the agency was first created was to reverse the flow of the river so that it flows away from Lake Michigan, not towards Lake Michigan, so that when we recycle and we reclaim and we clean the water, when we place it back into the river, it does not flow back into our fresh water supply. It actually goes downstream and ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. But it's actually clean.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add that maybe I didn't ask?
So what we started on was flooding. Another thing that we do with the agency is we build huge reservoirs, huge tunnels to collect excess rainwater, because that's a problem in many neighborhoods, as I said earlier, particularly in Black and brown neighborhoods. And so as we build these big reservoirs and these big tunnels, the rainwater collects into these reservoirs. And the thought is that it goes into these reservoirs rather than going into our basements, which you and I are familiar with. So we are, I say we're one of the most important agencies that no one knows about as it relates to either rainwater, stormwater, or it was as it relates to every time you flush your toilet. That's what the Water Reclamation District is doing, is we're taking that water and we're cleaning it and making sure that it's safe.
Well, Commissioner, once again, thank you very much for taking some of your time today.
Thank you very much. And is that it? That's all.